Mr. President, here is something that appeared in the Washington Post, headlined, "Trump is the GOP's Frankenstein monster." This was the headline of a Washington Post opinion piece authored by Robert Kagan, a former official of the Reagan State Department, who's now a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. It's true, Donald Trump is the Republican Party's Frankenstein. Republicans have spent the last 8 years stoking the fires of resentment and hatred, building Trump piece by piece. Today, the Republican establishment acts like it's surprised by Donald Trump and his victories around the country. They feign outrage that a demagogue spewing vile is somehow winning in a party that has spent years telling immigrants they're not welcome in America. They act surprised that Republican voters are flocking to a birther candidate, even as Republican congressional leaders continue to support a man who refuses to distance himself from the Ku Klux Klan. They express shock and outrage that Republican voters cheer Trump's schoolyard taunts, even as they trounce the most common courtesies extended to every president, even as they deny a fair hearing to a president's Supreme Court nominee for the first time ever, first time in history. Republicans should be surprised. They spent 8 years laying the groundwork for the rise of Donald Trump. The reality is that Republican leaders are reaping what they've sown. As Mr. Kagan said in the Washington Post opinion piece yesterday, and I quote, "The party's own political crimes are being punished in a bit of cosmic justice fit for a Greek tragedy," close quote. 7 years ago, the Republican leader and his party decided that President Obama was an illegitimate president. They decided his presidency was unworthy of their basic respect and good faith efforts. Congressional Republicans decided that whatever policies this president proposed, they would reflexively oppose them, regardless of the merits. Instead, congressional Republicans had only one objective: to keep President Obama from being reelected. In order to do that, the Republican leader and his party refused to engage the president or Democrats on policy. No matter how dire the crisis for the American people, Republican leaders decided it was more important to deny President Obama an achievement than to help people in need. Mr. President, can we have order in the Senate, please?
Will the Senate come to order, please?
It's very difficult to make a presentation when we have a little deal going on across the way. Mr. President, no matter how dire the crisis for the American people, Republican leaders decided, I repeat, it was more important to deny President Obama an achievement than to help people in need. Think about the monumental legislation that Republicans refused to even engage in, let alone work on. The American Recovery and Investment Act, known as the stimulus. When our economy was in a nosedive, remember, when Obama was elected, that month he was elected, the country lost 800,000 jobs in 1 month. We were in the throes of the Great Recession, and yet it took a clean effort to get a mere 3 Republicans to work with us on that legislation. Very important. They were strong. They were courageous. Specter, Collins, and Snow. But Republican leadership made it clear they didn't want their senators working with President Obama on the stimulus. But we got it done. Health care. Before Obamacare, there were nearly 50 million Americans with no health insurance. Since then, almost 20 million more Americans have gained health coverage. Today, if you have a pre-existing disability, you're covered with insurance. Today, the rate of no insurance is below 10%. This is all in spite of congressional Republicans who would not work with Democrats despite our best efforts, refused to do anything, to engage in any way. When the debate over health care started, 3 Republicans, Snow, Grassley, and Enzi, members of the very important Finance Committee, acted interested in fixing our nation's health care system. But Republican leadership, I can say, twisted their arms, convince them, whatever words we want to use, to get them in line with the Republican leaders' wishes and abandon any hope of bipartisanship on the issue. So there was none. Senator Snowe voted for the bill in the Finance Committee, but the Republican leadership even turned her to vote no on the Senate floor. And the senior senator from Iowa went back to Iowa and started talking about death panels. Doesn't that sound like something Donald Trump would do? Wall Street and the Dodd-Frank legislation. Wall Street crashed. I can remember being in the White House and the Republican Secretary of the Treasury, a wonderful man, Secretary Paulson, was on his knees begging Nancy Pelosi to work with him. The country was in deep trouble. Democrats controlled the body. I had a Republican president, and we worked with the Republican president. In the shadow of the economic ruin created by Wall Street's unhinged greed, Republicans would not work with us to rein in the big banks and financial institutions. They had been warned by Republican leadership. In the end, only one Republican voted for that bill. Only one. Time and time again, congressional Republicans went to the extreme to block any positive legislation to improve our nation. The tactics Republicans used to obstruct the president were unprecedented. In effect, the Republican leader told the president that none of his policies would get a fair hearing from the Republicans, and that's basically true. Republicans denied the office of the president respect it deserves. Their shoddy and disrespectful treatment became the norm. In 6 years, the Republican leader launched more than 500,000 that is a little high. In 6 years, the Republican leader launched more than 500 filibusters. Now, during the same 6-year period, Lyndon Johnson, in 6 years, had to overcome 2 filibusters, 500 to 2. This is far more than anyone ever imagined could happen in this great body. And actions speak louder than words. Automatically filibustering the president's policies for years on end sends a clear and simple message. Republicans think that this president's proposals are illegitimate. But instead of working for the American people, Republicans decided that making the extreme right wing happy was more important. Republicans blocked legislation to prevent criminals and suspected terrorists from buying guns, even background checks. Republicans blocked common sense campaign finance reform. We had 59 votes to allow some disclosure of all this, these huge amounts of money. Not a single Republican voted with us. Not a single Republican. Republicans voted to deport dreamers. Republicans blocked an increase in the minimum wage. Republicans blocked equal pay for women. Republicans blocked efforts to do something about student loan debt. Now Republicans are blocking a nominee to the Supreme Court before that person's even been nominated. This is just a short list of what they've blocked. From this rhetoric to their actions, Republicans have set the Trump standard. The Republican Party has long used Islam to fearmonger. Now Donald Trump is doing the same thing. The Republican Party has spent years railing against Latinos and immigrants, trying to incite fear. Congressman Steve King called undocumented immigrants drug dealers. He described their bodies in a very negative, ugly way. Now Donald Trump saying the same thing. Donald Trump is the ultimate fulfillment of the Republican Party's legacy of obstruction and resentment. But to be frank, it's not only Trump. Senator Cruz, Senator Rubio, and Ben Carson are saying basically the same thing. Maybe they're a little more subtle, but they're saying the same thing. After all, this is the same party, the Republican Party, that yesterday saw 9 of its members vote against naming a post office after the world-famous poet and civil rights activist Maya Angelou. Hard to believe. And even as the establishment condemns the things Donald Trump says and does, Republican leadership is still supporting him. Speaker of the House yesterday affirmed that he will vote for Donald Trump if he's a Republican nominee for president. Senate Republican leader has not said he won't support Donald Trump if he is the nominee, publicly at least. Republicans are supporting a man who refused to denounce the KKK, a man who continues to denigrate immigrants, Muslims, and the disabled. Donald Trump is the standard bearer for the Republican Party. Republicans created him by spending 7 years appealing to some of the darkest forces in America. Now it's up to the Republicans to try and undo what they've done by denouncing Donald Trump. It's time for Republicans to stop the Frankenstein they created. Trump is the GOP's Frankenstein monster. If Republicans fail to stop Donald Trump, he'll tear the party apart even more than it is now.